Hello everyone, today we're going to make this shadow box that I created using the Joy to the World stamp set and some cuts from the Complete Creativity collection. Not only am I going to show you how I made the shadow box, I'm going to walk you through how to manipulate each one of the Cricut images in Design Space. I'm going to start by stamping this Joy to the World image onto a piece of MissC's paper that has been cut to fit the recess on my shadow box. I'm placing it onto the stamping platform since I will be stamping with two different inks. This image is going to be heat embossed, so I'm going to use my anti-static bag on the paper to prevent any excess powder from sticking where I don't want it to. I'll first stamp the image in Versamark ink. Then I'll stamp the image in a layer of white daisy pigment ink. Then sprinkle it with white embossing powder. Now here's a tip for you. Sometimes your embossing powder gets stuck in this tray. I like to use my anti-static bag on the tray to prevent any powder from sticking when I go to empty it back into the jar. Here I'm just sprinkling my image with embossing powder. Then you'll see as I dump that excess back into the jar, the anti-static bag has prevented any excess powder from sticking to the tray. I will heat set the embossing powder using a heat tool, and then this image is ready to be placed inside the shadow box. Here I have a shadow box that I've picked up from a local craft store, and I've cut a couple of different images from my Cricut. Now each one of these was manipulated to match the shadow box that I purchased. Let me show you how I did that. I'm going to go to my images, choose cartridges, then type Complete Creativity so that I can see all of the images in this collection. This collection is only available for purchase on my website. I'll be putting a link below in the comments. I'm going to be using the little pine bough images from this layout, and I'll be using the Bethlehem images from this card. I'm also going to want a poinsettia. So I'm going to search images and I'm going to filter out ones that I own, and I'm going to choose this poinsettia image that comes from our Flower Market collection. Now that I've chosen my images, I'm going to insert them into the canvas and delete the images that I'm not going to use on this project. This is done by simply clicking them in the Layers panel and clicking Delete on your keyboard, or clicking the red X, or clicking the little Delete trash can at the top. The next step is to separate this pine bough image from these two tag images. Some of the Complete Creativity images come as dual images, and I've talked about this in one of my other videos. In order to separate the two images, I'm going to have to use the contour, and I'm going to get rid of the images I'm not going to use so that I have just the pine bough image that I need for my project. When you insert flowers into Design Space from the Flower Market collection, they come as a grouped image. To resize the image, I like to hide all of the images except for the largest flower layer. I resize the largest flower layer to the 3.75 inches I need for my project, then unhide the other images. Since they are all grouped, all of my other images will size proportionately to that 3.75 size. Here I've ungrouped the layers, and I'm going to change the color to match the black cardstock, white cardstock, and vellum that I'll be cutting these images out of. Now that the flower and the bough are ready to be cut, I'm going to group the flower image, and then I'm going to hide both the pine bough and the flower so that I can start working on manipulating this town image. Before I start manipulating these images, I need to delete that middle layer. It's a shadow layer that's included with this little Bethlehem town, and I don't need it for my project. You're going to have to measure the recesses of the shadow box that you own and take into account the little spaces in between each one of the recesses. The width of my shadow box is 6 inches, so I've made each one of these images 6 inches wide, and I'm unlocking the images so that I can manipulate both the height and the width to get the look that I want with the two layers. My recesses are only 2 inches high, so I'm keeping these layers pretty close on top of each other. I'm going to change the width again to 6 inches, but you can see with these two layers, my height is over 4 inches. I have a lot of space at the base of this town, so I'm going to be slicing that off. I'll start here by inserting a rectangle and sizing it to the total size of my 3 recesses at the base of my shadow box. So that's 6 inches by 2 inches. Now you can see here, it doesn't quite fit yet. I'm going to change the color of this rectangle just so it's easier for me to see as I'm kind of playing with the size of these 2 images. So you see here, it's just not quite the size where I need it. And so I'm going to manipulate the image a little bit more, changing the height and the width. I don't want to make it too wonky. I don't want it too stretched and uneven, but I still want it to fit within that image parameter. I like how this back layer looks. So before I slice, I'm going to replicate this rectangle so I have it for the next layer. I'm going to choose the 2 layers that I want to slice, select slice, and now I have the back layer for my project. I'm going to repeat this process again with the front layer. I'm moving it up to match to the back layer. I need to move it to the front first. I'm going to place it over the back layer to give it the look that I want with the 2 layers. Place that rectangle behind the 2 images to make sure that my layers aren't going to be too large to fit within that 2 inch by 6 inch size. Here again, I've unlocked it, changing the height, changing the width, and then again, I'm going to select the 2 images and I'm going to slice them so that they fit within my shadow box. Now that the 2 layers are the height and width I desire to fit the recesses of my shadow box, I'm going to want to add some cut lines so that each one of these layers fits perfectly in the 2 by 2 slots of the shadow box. I like to use the position feature when I insert cut lines or score lines onto a project. So I'm first going to take that bottom layer, I'm going to type the position into the position feature over here. So 0 for X, 0 for Y, so that it puts it right in that upper left-hand corner. I'm going to insert a score line. I'm going to resize it to 2 inches high. Then I'm going to change that score line to a cut line and position it at 2 inches and 0 inches. I duplicate the cut line, then place this second cut line at 4 inches and 0 inches. Once the cut lines have been placed where I need them, I can change the background to the color to match the paper, attach those 2 cut lines to the image, and then I'm going to repeat the process with the second layer. I'm placing that layer into the upper left-hand corner, 0, 0 position, duplicating one of my cut lines from the first layer, placing it at the 2 inch mark, then at the 4 inch mark, attaching them to the layer, and now I've added 2 more cut lines. Let's take a look at what this is going to look like when we cut it out. You can see right here on my images, there are some cut lines in between each one of these little parts of the town. These are going to fit perfectly in those 2 inch recesses of my shadow box. I've brought back those images I've hidden and I'm going to play with this pine bough image. First, I'm going to replicate it. Then I'm going to use the color sync feature to change those pine boughs to the same color as the base of the poinsettia. I'm just going to rotate them, flip them, play with them a little bit to determine how many of these pine boughs I want for my project. At this point, I can save my project and I'm going to check that color sync panel one more time to make sure that all of my images are being cut out of the papers, vellum, and cardstock that I want them to be cut out of. I did notice a rogue white layer, so I'm just dragging it down to the white layer, and I have a black layer, my red layer, my gray layer, and I'm ready to hit Make It. I like to save as much of my materials as I can, so I always move my images around on my mats before I start cutting. My first layer is a vellum layer, so I need to change the dial to custom, and I'll be choosing vellum from the materials list. Depending on the vellum you're using, you may need to change the pressure on your blade. Close to my heart vellum cuts fine with the default pressure. Before I cut the white daisy layer, I'm going to want to change that dial back to cardstock plus, then cut out the white daisy. Our white daisy is a little bit thicker, so cardstock plus works best for this type of material. Do you remember those cut lines we added to the town image? Let me show you what this looks like as your machine starts cutting them. Your machine will first cut out the image, cut out the windows, cut out all of the details for the town. Then it will go back and it will add those 2 cut lines so that your town image is divided into thirds to fit inside your shadow box. A little side note here, after looking at those images on my mat, I realized I did not like where those cut lines were at, so I did go back and make some changes before I created my project. Now I'm going to finish assembling my shadow box. I've already added that back town layer, but you can see I did cut off one of the trees and move it. Once I added those layers, I realized that the left side of the shadow box looked a little blank, so I just trimmed it with my scissors and added it. I am applying this second layer with some foam tape. I did want it to pop up a little bit and give it a more of a 3-dimensional look, so I've just cut and trimmed some foam tape and some foam dots, and I've added that second layer of the town. Now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to work on the poinsettia. So I've cut it out of black cardstock, white cardstock, and vellum. I'm going to start by brushing some black shimmer onto the base layer of the poinsettia. I love how the black shimmer looks on black cardstock. It just adds so much detail, especially to flowers. On my original design, I used a red shimmer brush to add some lines to the center of the flower. Today, I'm just going to use a clear shimmer brush to just add a little bit of shimmer onto the vellum and onto the white poinsettias. This second shadow box is a gift for somebody, and I felt like they would prefer the white over the red. You could choose to use any of our shimmer brushes to add some color to the center of the flowers, or you could use inks or markers. So now I'm going to assemble it, and you can see my vellum kind of curled with the shimmer brush, but I do like this look because it gives it more of a natural look like flowers have as petals are opening. I'm just going to use my bone folder, and I'm going to curl down the base, and I'm going to fold them up. I'm going to do the same with each one of the white layers. Now, true poinsettias do have a fold in the middle of each one of the leaves. So you can take your fingers and you can create a fold if you would like, or you can just do what I'm doing and fold down and then fold up. You choose if you want that line in the center. Like I said, I'm just using my bone folder and using my fingers. I'm just going to curl each one of these layers down, and then I'm just going to fold up each one of the centers before I assemble my flower. I like to have quite a bit of bulk in my flowers for more of a 3-dimensional look, so I'm using 3D foam dots in between each layer. Now, I'm not concerned about the dot showing under the vellum. It's going to be hidden by the next layer. I'm adding that foam dot, adding another layer, and I'm just rotating each set of petals as I go. Once the poinsettia has been assembled, I'm going to cluster some small silver glitter gems into the center of my poinsettia. Adding gems to the center of flowers just makes them pop. We have these available in gold too, so if you were to use some red shimmer like I did on my original one, I think those gold ones would match perfectly. The last step is to add this poinsettia and the pine boughs onto the shadow box. So I'm first going to take my finger and I'm just going to curl up each one of the pine boughs. Then I'm going to glue them onto the shadow box. Now some of these I'm going to trim, and I am going to keep those trimmings. I'll show you here in a minute how I'm going to use them, but I'm just gluing down the pine boughs directly onto the shadow box, making sure that I'm not covering up any of that Joy to the World image. So here I have some remnants of those pine boughs, and I just wanted to use them for some small layers. So I'm just trimming them and I'm gluing them down as additional layers under the poinsettia. And I'm going to check and see how this looks. And to me, I need to move a few things, and I'm going to add another pine bough. So I'm going to move this little bit here down a little lower, and I'm going to add another piece of pine bough up at the top. Once I've added all my pine boughs, then I can use 2 layers of 3D foam dots to raise my poinsettia up off the shadow box and give it a beautiful 3-dimensional look. And now our Bethlehem Nativity shadow box is complete. Let's take a look at the original one I created and the one we made together today. You can see there's just a subtle difference between the red shimmer on this smaller poinsettia and then a larger poinsettia with clear shimmer. I think they both look lovely. Thank you for joining me today. I hope you were inspired to create something new and that you learned some fun new techniques in Cricut Design Space. Please feel free to comment below if you have any questions and stop by my blog for a full list of the products used. I can't wait to see what you create.